I do think there is a view among some in the Trump administration, and clearly by Putin, that they should be able to decide this without Ukraine at the table, that Ukraine is an other than, it's a lesser than, it doesn't count. And they'll just have to accept whatever we decide for them.
President Trump is weighing up whether to invite Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky along with him to Alaska for that summit on Friday next week with President Vladimir Putin. Leaders of the UK, France, Italy, Germany, Finland and the European Commission have issued a joint statement saying that the path to peace in Ukraine cannot be decided without Ukraine. But President Trump hinted on Friday that a peace deal could include agreement to, and I quote here, swap disputed territories between Ukraine and Russia, but Zelensky has refused to cede territory. So where does this leave negotiations? Well, let's speak to Debra Cagan, former US government official in State Department and Department of Defense, and currently senior advisor on security issues at the Atlantic Council. Debra, welcome back to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Debra, as far as you can tell, and I appreciate that this is a difficult question, what do you think is going to be on President Trump's playbook next Friday?
I really don't know. Mine is just, I'll say right out, it's conjecture. But I do think it's kind of ridiculous. I agree with our European colleagues who've made a joint statement, because it's rather ridiculous to have a discussion with Putin about Ukraine without Ukraine present. It has all of the earmarks of 1938 Munich conference when Europe gave away Sudetenland to the Nazis. And I feel very comfortable making that analogy. Some people don't like it, but I think it's a dose of realism here.
Do you think that President Zelensky being there is actually most important? Because without him there, there is a danger that a deal might have been presented as a fait accompli to the Ukrainian president saying, this is what we've discussed, take it or leave it.
It's a very interesting question, because I do think there is a view among some in the Trump administration, and clearly by Putin, that they should be able to decide this without Ukraine at the table, that Ukraine is an other than, it's a lesser than, it doesn't count. And they'll just have to accept whatever we decide for them. But interestingly enough, I think if anything, Trump's position is less than it was 6 months ago on this in terms of enforcing, because the U.S. has decided to continue the previous aid, but not to provide new aid, but indeed just will have the Europeans pay for this and then send the equipment to Ukraine. And I don't think Donald Trump will cut that off, because I think it's hundreds of billions of dollars for U.S. defense industry, and he doesn't want to cut that off. So I think in some ways he has much less potency here to implement something without Ukraine, because his standing is not monolithic on this issue.
There is also an element that we've seen in the reporting of the possible talks, which entails this willingness from the President Trump, to develop commercial ties with Russia. There's talk of using Russian oil, Russian gas, investments going both ways. How much of that is going to be on the president's mind, do you think, when he sits down with the Russian president?
I have no doubt that there are people in Trump world pushing him to do things like help us reopen the market for Russia to Europe for gas. And he's had a number of other issues on this, sort of, this is what the EU can do and not do. And I think if I'm a member of the EU, I would be justifiably outraged to think that Donald Trump can make a decision about where Europeans purchase their gas, that Donald Trump can make a decision on what they can and cannot do for any sort of peace negotiation, since it would be European boots on the ground and not American boots on the ground, or aircraft, whatever you want to call it. So I think they're justifiably outraged. And I'm hearing from some of my colleagues that they were a little bit shocked that Witkoff thought that he could negotiate that with Russia on their behalf. That did not go over well. But yes, absolutely, there are people in Trump world who think there's money to be made here, and that's going to be primus inter pares for them.
Is Trump under any pressure from his government, the people supporting him, to get something from this deal on, these talks on Friday? We know that there have been discussions. Some people were very much pro continuing to give support to Ukraine, but we saw early in this second Trump administration, the famous minerals deal, this idea that the US want to see something for their money that they've sent to Ukraine. What are the pushes and pulls, if you like, that Donald Trump is going to be facing when sitting down with Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think there's two fundamental questions here. The first is the Trump administration has said that Russia, Ukraine, indeed Europe writ large, is not of vital security interest for the United States. I think that's a huge misnomer with a lot of tails to it that haven't been thought through very carefully. And I think and the second part of this is this view toward the Indo-Pacific. If we could just get rid of this European problem that is vexing us, then we can move toward the Indo-Pacific. But I think that second part is also a bit of a fault line for them, because they don't understand that Chinese hegemony is not limited to a geographic area in the Indo-Pacific, as our Northern European, people who live in the high north know quite well. China has designs on the Arctic as well and places like that. So I think there is this logic that if we can just get this peace negotiation done, I can get my Nobel Prize, and then I can move on and just focus on the Indo-Pacific and not have to worry about Europe anymore, and it can become just a European problem. And I think that is just a gross misunderstanding of how Putin and Xi Jinping see the world.
Speaking of Europe, is there a potential moment where Donald Trump and Europe really fall out? Europe have put their weight firmly behind President Zelensky, saying no negotiation will be valid without Ukraine's presence, support again for Ukraine and their territories. Is this a potential sensitive moment where Europe and Donald Trump might fall out?
Yeah, I don't think fallout is maybe the right way to characterize it, but I do think there has been a gross misunderstanding and misrepresentation of what the Europeans are capable of. I think when you have these people around you who think that Europe is not equal partner and the like, you come to these false conclusions. I think this is going to be one of those cases where be careful what you wish for. You have a situation where Germany is talking about building the largest land army in Europe, and no one's batting an eye. Can you imagine that if that happened 20 years ago? And you have defense industry in Europe going out at a very, very quick pace to rearm themselves. And I think I think Europe is just going to be stronger, better, and faster at this. And I'm not sure that there are people in Trump world who thought that was going to be the outcome. Falling out is probably not in the cards just because of the trade relationship and the like and that dependency. But I do think things can get much stickier than they are now. And the Europeans are increasingly finding their independent voice, which I think is actually good for all of us who believe in democracies.
Debra, thank you for speaking with us. Always good to talk. Debra Cagan there, former US government official in the State Department and Department of Defense, currently senior advisor on security issues at the Atlantic Council.